I've got one flame to burn, one race that I can say I ran.
Hey everybody, welcome to the 21047.com podcast. My name is Keith Cartwright. I am the host of this show, and I'm really glad to have you along listening in today, wherever it is that you're listening, whenever it is that you might be listening in. This is my attempt, as always, to run to dark with the light that I have found in my running journey and in the stories of some friends that I have met along the way. One of those friends is Rachel Wood. Rachel sponsors today's episode. She sponsors me through Patreon. Patreon is a platform where listeners, fans, friends, family can financially support this effort of mine. And so I appreciate it. Allows me to come up with more time to do this, more resources to do it, to go to different places to find bigger and better stories and share them further and wider. So Patreon is a real foundation for everything I'm really trying to do here. So the financial support I am extremely grateful for. And today that financial support comes from Rachel Wood. So thank you, Rachel, very much. If you want to learn more about Patreon, you can go to my website, 21047.com, TWOTIM47.com. Click on the Support Me tab there at the top, and then when you get to the Support Me page, you'll see more information about Patreon, as well as a list of the Patreon supporters who back this program, this podcast, and this 21047.com effort. So thank you to all those supporters. And today I want to start off just a little bit sharing a story that happened to me, this running journey. It just continues to overwhelm me at times. So my last podcast, I shared my Houston Marathon journey and how that journey ended without me completing a marathon. And when you don't complete a marathon, you don't get a medal. And so that's one of the downsides to not finishing your marathon. I didn't worry too much about that because, I've got plans, like I said, to go back next year, finish what I started, and that will include bringing home that marathon medal. But my buddy Anthony in Arkansas, who I've never met in person, we have met online through the Megs Miles Supporters Facebook page, talked back and forth quite a bit through the online platforms, but I've never met Anthony. But when I got home yesterday, I had a package waiting for me in the mail, and I came in and I opened up that package, and Anthony had taken the time to make a wood-carved medal with the logo that I used on my shirt to run the Houston Marathon. It was put on the medal there, painted over. It was just a beautiful scene, and it was, he said, "Here's your medal." And he wrote 18 on there, and Houston Strong, Meg Strong, to signify the 18 miles that I did finish. And so I've got that hanging up on my medal rack right now as if I actually did finish that race. But I want to, just thank Anthony for doing that. But more, it really draws to light the power of this running community that I belong to. One of the reasons that I find so much fulfillment in being a part of that community, and just how much it goes well beyond running. There is a human spirit in this running community that I just don't know that I've found anywhere else, that I've experienced anywhere else. The fact that this man, a stranger in terms of real life meetings, would take the time and have the thought to send me that just meant an awful lot to me. So thank you. That story in many ways is a great introduction to my interview today. I hope you all listened. Back in December, I interviewed Dean Otto, and Dean Otto's story came to me from a friend who shared a clip from the Ellen Show, and it featured these three men who have been drawn together by this accident. Dean Otto had been out riding his bike, got hit by Will Huffman, who was driving a truck, and then Matt McGirt is the doctor that in many ways put Dean Otto all back together again. But the interaction, the human spirit, as you'll hear in this podcast interview, that drew them together and became sort of this outflow to people that were just drawn to their story, has become just a real powerful sort of story in my life. And so when I interviewed Dean, he just happened to mention that Will Huffman, the driver that hit him lived in the Richmond area, that he had moved up here from North Carolina. Well, when Dean said that, I knew, boy, I've got to look out to Will Huffman. I was so taken by the interview with Dean Otto, and then just some of the things he said about this guy, Will Huffman. I thought, man, I really need to talk with Will Huffman to get, we had Dean Otto's impressions, Dean Otto's sort of experience of what it's like to be hit and recover from the injuries and all that went into that and all the support he got in that. But, I couldn't help but wondering about what this guy went through who hit him. What was sort of the emotions he was going through? What sort of support systems did he have? And, where did he fit into this story? And so I hunted down Will Huffman. We met for some coffee. I said, hey, would you be willing to do an interview? And so this weekend, Will and his wife, Janelle, two lovely, lovely people. I tell you, the interview was great, but it was just a fantastic evening sitting around chatting with both of them. They have a strong faith in the Lord that we share, so it was good, just good conversation to sit and have. But I did get the chance to interview Will Huffman, and I am excited to share his side of the story tonight. They all do, as you'll hear in this interview, they have three very distinct parts in this story that makes it the powerful story it is. But as I talked with Dean, you really got some different impressions about him and really how his story made this what it is. But then in talking with Will, it was a completely different angle and sort of a completely different story within the story that made his side sort of a powerful piece of this whole thing too, that has its own sort of lessons and messages in it. So anyhow, I am going to turn you over to that conversation. This is me and Will Huffman, so I hope you enjoy it. All right, well, I want to welcome Will Huffman to the 21047.com podcast. So welcome, Will.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
Yeah, so just as sort of a refresher or some backstory, is about a month ago, I interviewed Dean Otto on the podcast.
Right.
And so a friend of mine had sent me this clip of the Ellen Show about this guy who was out riding his bicycle, had got hit by this young man, and this surgeon did some miracle work on the guy. And it's a much bigger story, but these three gentlemen end up on the Ellen Show and telling this story of, really it turned out being a story of forgiveness, I think,
right,
and faith. And so when I interviewed Dean, he certainly talked about the immediate impact of being hit.
Yeah.
He talked briefly about the young man who hit him and really this relationship that came to be between him and this young man and his surgeon. And so tonight I'm blessed to have the young man who hit him.
Right.
And
yep.
So it's really, I sit and shake my head a little bit that it's been, 6 weeks ago, my friend sends me this clip, and since then I've been able to interview Dean, and now here you are sitting in my house. It's just, God weaves some incredible stories. So I have Will Huffman sitting here, and Will, if you listen to the Dean Otto podcast, Will was the driver of the vehicle that hit Dean that day. And so if you haven't heard that story, I'd encourage you to go back and listen to the Dean Otto interview, and it'll probably help you out with this interview. But Will, one of the first things that I talked with Dean about was that in those immediate moments of laying on the side of the road after being hit, and just kind of what was going through his head and what he was thinking, and he shared that with us. I'm curious, from your standpoint, in that immediate moment of realizing you just hit this man, what was going through your head?
Well, obviously there's a lot of panic, right? I mean, just not knowing what to do next. Fortunately, I had one of my best friends with me. And in hindsight, looking back, it was one of those things where if someone said, hey, this is going to happen, pick one person to be with you, I would have picked that friend. And so he was really a calming presence for me, and he was able to go over to Dean and do most of the communicating because I was pretty shaken up. but really just panic and not knowing, feeling really helpless. Not because there's nothing you can do, right? You got to wait for the paramedics to get there. So that was really how I felt, helpless.
And so the paramedics, they take Dean obviously to the hospital. What happened with your day from that point? You see him get taken away. What happens with you in the immediate aftermath of that?
Well, it was crazy because it's such a major event. But they took him away, and that was basically it. Everybody left, and we were there. And my friend had traveled in from out of town, and we were headed to Virginia Tech for a football game, and we had to get there because my friend, that was a leg in his trip that he had to get home. So he actually took over driving because I was pretty shaken up.
Yeah.
So we had to make that leg so he could get where he needed to go. But it was crazy because it was like life sort of went on, but I didn't know who Dean was. I knew his first name and his age from telling the paramedic, but that was all I really knew about him. So I spent the next few days just trying to figure out who he was.
And then you eventually did. How
Right.
did you figure out who he was? And then once you did, what happened from there?
Yeah, so I was checking every site that I could possibly find. I looked on Facebook and Google, and I was searching Dean, accident, 51, bike, anything I could find. And ultimately what happened was his personal trainer had posted a picture of him from a race that he had just run and said, Dean's been hit, and just asking for prayers. And I recognized his picture, and so that was the first connection. And so my wife reached out to his trainer and said, hey, my husband is the one that was driving, and we don't want to overstep by any means, but we just want to let you know who we are and that we're praying for you. And if there's anybody that wants to communicate with us, here's how to do so.
And so you ended up going to the hospital to visit him. I know Dean talked about that in my interview with him, and I was thinking about that today. What sort of nerves are going through you? What are you thinking about when you know I'm about to see this guy that I hit and who's going through this struggle? What is going through your head in meeting him for the first time?
Well, so I had spoken to his wife, and so had Janelle spoke to Beth as well, and she was very gracious on the phone. So I knew at least that she was going to be gracious. I didn't know how Dean was going to be. But I look back on that, and I try to remember how I felt in that moment, and I don't really remember. I remember walking into the rehab facility. I remember getting on the elevator, and with that, felt like it took 20 minutes just to go up the elevator. I remember all that. But once we walked in, Dean was immediately very welcoming, and that eliminated any fear that I had about talking to him.
He says that in the immediate aftermath of the accident, he had already forgiven you to the degree that somebody had to forgive somebody. What did that mean to you in terms of interacting with him and your relationship with him? Well,
when we were there in the street, he asked me, did you not see me? And as soon as I told him that I hadn't seen him, it was almost like this physical sigh that he breathed, like he knew that I was telling him the truth and that he believed that I really didn't see him. And we didn't talk much more in that moment. So I didn't really know what kind of forgiveness he was feeling. But once we met in the hospital room, I apologized to him and said, I'm terribly sorry for what happened. And he pretty much cut me off and said, you don't need to explain yourself. I know it was an accident, and I forgive you for it, and we have to move on. I'm going to move on, and you have to move on. So in the 90 minutes or so that we were together, we didn't talk very much about what had happened. We talked a lot more about what we were going to do going forward. But as far as how I felt, that week leading up to our visit, it was pretty hard. I felt tons of guilt, and even though I knew it was an accident, I still had this guilt that I had changed someone's life so drastically, and that it may not ever look the same, and I thought a lot about his family, and so that there was a lot of emotions involved in that. But the visit was tremendous, just in terms of being able to forgive myself to the extent that I could. It's been a process. It didn't all happen in that hospital room, but it at least allowed me to kind of pull my head out of the sand and take the next step.
And so he told us the story about you and Janelle, your wife, and him and his wife, I believe Beth. Wasn't long after that you all ran a 5K together?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I guess it was, I can't remember the timeline exactly. I think it was sometime in January or early February, because the 5K was in early March. And Janelle said, hey, let's go, I think we should run a 5K tomorrow. I said, well, I don't think I really want to run it tomorrow, but let's start training. We can start training tomorrow at least, and then a month from tomorrow, then let's do it. And she agreed. So we went to this park in Charlotte, and it was a little bit outside of Charlotte. And when we got there, there were probably 7 or 8 cars in the parking lot. And Charlotte's obviously a huge place, so there's not that many people there. And we took off down the trail, and we weren't 5 minutes in, and we bump into Dean. He's exercising. And so we give each other, a big sweaty hug, and he said, what are you guys doing? And I said, well, actually, we want to run a 5K in about a month, and so we came out to start training. And he said, well, actually, I'm going to run my comeback 5K 1 month from today, and you guys better be there. Of course, we're like, yeah, that's perfect. So that's how that whole thing came about, which was, that wasn't an accident.
Yeah. No, he and I talked, and I'm sure you listened to that about, he had made the statement that you all were just in the wrong place at the wrong time, but I joked with him a little bit that, man, there's just so many things that seems like God had such a plan in this, that there were a lot of right time, right place sort of things, like you just pointed out, in this huge city of Charlotte. Y'all got 5Ks on your mind, and then you bump into each other at the right time and place to coordinate doing it together. Now, y'all ran a half marathon together. Tell me how that came about.
So Dean had challenged Dr. McGirt to run the half marathon with him early on. And we were actually in Charlotte. He was having it was a fundraiser, but it was also kind of his comeback ride. It was the first bike ride he was going to do since the accident, and we wanted to be there and support that, so we went into town for that. That was actually the first time I got to meet Dr. McGirt, and just in the course of our conversation, it kind of became evident that Will should probably run this thing too. And
now the two of them had already decided they were running this thing. They already
decided that they were going to run it, and then they said, you should do it. And I agreed. I said, yeah, I should. I don't know how, but I should. And that was what started that.
Because you hadn't run that far before.
No, I ran cross country in high school, but I was one of the slow ones for sure. And I think my max that I'd ever run was like 8 miles.
Right.
So I wasn't a real big runner and hadn't done a ton of running since high school.
But they brought this up, and you just all of a sudden, it sounds like my first half marathon. It was like this idea. I was talking with some friends, and then a couple of weeks later, I realized, holy cow, I'm signed up to run
this. Yeah,
I got to do this thing now.
Well, it was just one of those things where I knew that it really didn't matter about my physical abilities or any of that. This was so much bigger than a physical run. This was a symbolic run for the three of us to do it together. And so I was a little nervous because leading up to it, there was a lot of conversation about, we're going to do this together. And I thought, well, we're going to start together, but I don't know if we're going to finish together.
Right.
Because I know the athlete that Dean is, and I knew the athlete that Matt was, and I was a little concerned that I might hold them back, and I didn't want that to happen. I wanted them to go run their race and let me run my race, and ultimately that's what happened, and we had a great ending.
Yeah, so you all went out to Napa Valley. Now, I don't think I asked Dean, but I am curious why Napa Valley became the half marathon you chose to run.
Yeah, so they had already chosen the location when I got involved, and my understanding is they wanted to do it 1 year to the day, so there was only so many options on that particular day. Napa was one of them, and then the other two, I can't remember. I think one may have even been in Alaska. It was somewhere kind of crazy. And so Napa, I think, just made the most sense, and that's why they chose it.
Well, at least if they drug you into this thing, they took you to a cool,
It was a great,
cool place.
It was a great. The course was difficult, and I think they would agree. But it was a beautiful place to be, and the people in Napa, I mean, they were so welcoming of us, and even leading up to it, the Napa newspaper did a story on us, and from the time we got there, the store that sponsored the race, they were all, in our corner. It was almost like celebrities were there. I mean, Dean came in, and they were very excited that he had picked their race.
Now, so you all started this race together, and then Dean and Dr. McGirt, sounds like they kind of went on their way.
Yeah.
I didn't even know until I did the interview with Dean. I had read all your stories in a lot of different publications, but when he and I talked, and he casually mentioned that he had done that half marathon in under 2 hours.
Yeah.
Which,
right.
I've run 10 of them now. I think my fastest one is 2 hours and 37 minutes. It's a real struggle for me.
Yeah.
So this guy who 1 year prior was laying in a hospital, less than 2% chance of walking, is out there breaking two. It's a little bit humiliating for a guy like me. But so anyhow, those two finish. You're still out there on the course, and so my understanding is they turned around and came and found you. Is that how that went?
Yeah, that's how that went. So I ran the first 10 miles, really didn't have any issues in the first 10, and the course was interesting. The last 2 miles of it were essentially uphill. It was pretty crazy. And so once I got past mile 10, I started to struggle a little bit, and I have some issues with my heart, nothing too serious, but I was starting to feel some chest pain, and so I just slowed down because I didn't want to push it too hard. And about that time, Matt came and met up with me, and he's a doctor, so I told him what was going on, and he said, just stop. Let's just walk. It's not a big deal. Let's just walk a little bit, and then can you finish at the end? And I said, of course. So we walked a little bit, and Dean met us, and then we
went in together.
Cruised in the rest of the way.
Yeah. No, I don't know if you can see this picture I got up on my wall. That's one of my first half marathons, and actually when I saw the clip of you all as one of the news stories, you all coming across the line together, it really brought tears to my eyes, because those are moments I can relate to, where your friends are helping you across the line, and then really feeling into it, reading into it, the added emotion and bond that you all had. What, if I ask you, what you would say is the most special part of this bond you all have, what would you say? Because clearly you all have been on the Ellen Show. You've did countless interviews. I know you've been asked to come speak at different events. And to me, it seems like at the heart of all that, people are really just drawn to this unlikely relationship you all have. I'd just be curious what you would say would be the most special part of that relationship. Yeah,
so I think for me, and Harry Smith from the Today Show, I think captured it best as he was closing his segment that he did. And he said, is it a miracle when everything falls into place? Or is it the human spirit that rises us up beyond reasonable expectation? Maybe it's both. And I feel like that was sort of the theme of this, and that's been what has created this bond between us, is we all have a different spirit, but on the whole, it was a spirit to basically take what happened to us and take it to the next level. And how can we use it to impact people, and what good can we find out of it? So the whole time we did all these media pieces, we were kind of looking for somebody to just nail it, and who could tell it best. And when Harry said that at the end, for all of us, it was like, that's it. There's miraculous stuff in here, but there's also, it's about our spirit. And so I think the three of us have connected in this human spirit element of this story. And, that's what makes it special for us. it's hard to describe, honestly. Like, the way I feel about those two guys is very hard to put into words, because it's a unique relationship that I don't have with anybody else.
Right.
Just because of the situation.
Right.
Yeah.
And so where do you see this going from here? I know last time you and I talked, you were headed out. I don't know if that's happened or it's still in the works to, I think you were going to Arizona to talk.
We were planning on it, but there were some things that changed in that schedule. So Dean actually ended up going somewhere else to speak to that particular group. But we stay in touch. Dean and I stay in touch a little bit more than I'm able to stay in touch with Matt, because he's just very busy with his practice and his family. But Dean and I text often about sports, and so we jab at each other about that. But I'll be in Charlotte for work in a couple of weeks, so I plan to grab dinner with him. And so we definitely stay in touch, and I think we're all open to speaking opportunities or whatever presents itself for us to get together. I think we all love that. We all enjoy each other's company. So I don't see us ever losing touch. It's hard to imagine that happening. Dean
talked y'all into any future half marathons, or do you see any big runs in your future?
Yeah, he hasn't talked to me about it yet. I'm sure he's already playing. He's probably done a couple since we ran Napa, because that's just his thing. We haven't talked about it. The time period after the half, I thought, okay, that's probably might be one and done, but I don't know. I may do another one. You never know.
I hinted at him that he needs to get up here to Richmond, so maybe we can partner with him and get him up here.
Yeah. Well, I don't think he'd have to twist his arm. He loves it. He loves it, and he's obviously an incredible athlete. So, yeah, I don't think he'd have to twist his arm. He would be up here.
Yeah. And so if you had to share the biggest lesson you've learned or the biggest message that's come from this whole situation, what would that be?
That's a great question, because there's so many things, but as these months have passed, I've really been trying to figure out what is the biggest thing and what's the biggest takeaway. And I'm actually going to be speaking at my high school next week, and I'm going to be talking about this a little bit. But I think the theme that I've come up with is that we're all built to go beyond. And what I mean by that is beyond our circumstances, and just this idea of being built to handle certain things. And I'll give you a quick story that I think kind of summarizes that. When we were on the Ellen show and we were walking off the stage, Ellen was giving everybody a hug, and she hugged Dean and she said, I can't imagine a better person to be in your shoes. It was something to that effect. Yeah. And what she meant by that is, that over the course of his life, he has went through experiences that have allowed him to be forgiving. He's an incredible athlete. He was built to play the part in this story. And she hugged Matt and she said, if I ever have to have back surgery, you're going to be the guy to do it. And I'm sure that made him feel very good, because his life has been prepped to do that. Right. And then she hugged me and she said, if I ever get hit by a car, I hope you're the one that's driving. And you think about that, it's like, that's interesting. But I look at that, and it's kind of an honor for her to say that to me, because, it means that in the worst of circumstances, you handled it. And I hope most people's life is full of Dr. McGirt moments where they're saving the day. They're built to save the day. But, people are going to find themselves in Dean's seat, where they're built to, come through something very difficult, or they're built to be in my seat, which is to, handle an accident and the guilt and the emotions and all those things. So I think the biggest lesson for me is just that we've all had experiences that have built us up to be able to handle what comes our way, so that we can look beyond our circumstances and how we can basically take what happened to us and use that to impact others, whether it's raising money or just through an act of forgiveness, encourage somebody else to do the same.
Yeah, there's so much about that I love. And you and I are sitting here talking on a podcast that I do because I've found so many parallels in running with my faith journey and with my life journey. And I think one of those parallels is that one of the things that running teaches you is that you get out there and you train, and even on a daily or weekly basis, you go out and do some things that, wow, one, that was hard. Sometimes you did something, I didn't even think I could do that. But then what you find out when you're out running a half marathon or a marathon or 10K, 5K, you find out that those moments were building you,
right,
preparing you for this big event. Now, certainly it wasn't the same sort of event, but I think that is the parallel. And I think, you know, we share a faith in this God who finds a way to work miracles, and he's promised us that in these hardships in life, I'm going to work them, you know.
Right.
I'm going to work them to your good, to my good. And that's, the more I hear this story, and because that's the thing that blows my mind about it, the fact that it was all weaved together perfectly. Yeah. You know, and I think Ellen touched on that. You just touched on it. Yeah. And you all have this strong faith component to you all.
Yeah, and I think that's really it. I mean, our faith is what held us together, all of us, through this. And so if you don't have that, there's probably some things that don't fall into place. Right. Exactly right. And we've gotten to talk about our faith a little bit on some of the shows. In most cases, there's just only so much time that gets allotted for these things. And so they have to focus on the accident and the race, and we get all that. But I think that, you know, people that really dig into it and get to understand the story, they see that if it weren't for our faith and it weren't for understanding that God had a better plan than just an accident that day, that's really the foundation of the story.
Yeah, and I think you touched on it. I mean, to say it was the perfect doctor, to say that it was the perfect man to be hit and instinctively show forgiveness, to say that it was the perfect man to hit him, and then, you know, you can factor in some of these details, you know. Dean talked about he was at the end of the road and thought about turning around, actually had decided to kind of turn around, go back, but didn't. The fact that you had this buddy come to town that you hadn't seen in some time, if I remember last time we talked.
Probably a year or more.
Right, so we had all these sort of details aligned in a perfect way to generate this story to touch lives.
An outcome, right.
To say all that without acknowledging that there's a fairly creative author behind all of that is to really skip over a pretty miraculous element of it. And this is one of those stories that has certainly strengthened my faith, and I appreciate you all sharing it. I hope you'll continue to.
Well, we love talking about it, and I touched on it earlier, but I think just to go off what you just said, that the way that Harry Smith put it, I think was said so well, because it's really a miracle or miracles that occur that allow the story to play out the way that it does. You can't have the miracles without the human spirit, and you can't have the human spirit without the miracles. They kind of go hand in hand.
Right. Well, after talking with you and Dean, I think you all are the perfect spirits to keep carrying this forward, and I hope a lot of folks get to hear it. I'm glad to hear the high school students are going to get to hear the student, and hopefully...
Yeah, I'm excited to share it with them, and I hope some people will get some good out of it.
Absolutely. Well, I appreciate it, buddy. I'm going to, I think I'll stay on you and Dean, then maybe we can partner up here in November to run the next big race.
We'll keep it on the radar. I've been maintaining an active lifestyle and running and all those things. So
just in case they rope
just
you
in case somebody says, "Hey, you got to do this," I won't be totally out of shape.
Well, good deal. Well, I appreciate it, buddy.
Thanks.
Well, I hope you enjoyed that conversation with Will Huffman. Just a great, great young man. He was a pleasure to talk to, and I look forward to seeing where he takes this side of his story. Excited to hear that he's going to be talking to his high school this week. I do think that there's just a lot to take from his story, especially being, considering what he was talking about. We're all being built to respond to something, built to be something, and I hope he'll continue to take that message to, everywhere he goes. So thank you, Will, for being a part of this show, for expanding on the Dean Otto story. You guys, the three of you, the relationship you have made and the most unlikely of circumstances is really a inspiration to many of us. So thank you, Will, for giving us your piece of it. I hope you all will have a great week. I always appreciate you coming in and listening to this 21047.com podcast. I am working on an interview this week I think that you all will really enjoy next week. Again, just another referral sort of sent to me by a friend of mine who'd found this article about a woman in Houston who works with a lot of disability athletes down there. So I'll be talking with her Friday and hopefully sharing that episode early next week. Until then, I hope you all have a great week. Go out there and have some good runs. If you're not running, support somebody who is. And if you don't give a hoot about running, well, then just keep coming back here and listening to stories about running. Maybe running's not fun, but running stories are awesome. So thanks again for being here, and we'll talk to you soon.